everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So here's everything you need to know before watching The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2. I'm going to do a recap of the entire story. I'm not going to focus on every single story because there's a lot of stories within episodes that are very cool when you're watching the show and whatnot, but to do a recap, I'm just going to really cover the main beats here of the series and then also talk about some of the stuff happening in the Walking Dead universe just sort of as a whole, because that obviously connects with The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2. So before we go any further, make sure to be a subscriber if you want to get all my Walking Dead content like this. Now, it's possible you stopped watching when Carl died, or maybe when Glenn died, or maybe just when the original series ended, right? I've seen a lot of comments recently regarding The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon, and a lot of people who have just discovered it on Netflix, because I guess it just released on Netflix a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of people are saying that they're very interested in this series and they want to watch Season 2 and whatnot, and so here's everything you need to know regarding The Walking Dead universe in general before watching The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2. So first of all, The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 1 is set a few months after the end of The Walking Dead. So after Daryl says goodbye to Carol and everyone else and goes out to search for Rick, he spends a few months looking for him, but ends up getting in trouble and then ends up in France. And over the course of that first season, a few weeks go by. It could be a couple of days, but I'm assuming it's like within that time frame, to like a couple of days to a week to maybe like a couple of weeks. That's the one thing I'll say with The Walking Dead is never try to be too exact with the timeline. It's just very general. It's like a couple of weeks, a couple of months, a year or two, you know, things might change here and there because of the writing, this and that. So don't take the timeline too seriously, I'd say. Like, it's always sort of been like that. If you remember, even back in the day with The Walking Dead, somehow from seasons 1 to 8, that was only 2 years, but Carl aged. I mean, the actor aged like 8 years over that time, and we're expected to believe that only 2 years went by. Season 2 has been confirmed to start basically the same day as the season 1 finale, at least according to the showrunner, but I've watched the opening minutes of season 2, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a line of dialogue there that sort of teases that it's been at least 2 weeks since the finale, but roughly the same time. And yeah, there's like no huge time jump of like a year or two. So yeah, just for some perspective on where season 2 fits in, it's roughly the same time. And also some perspective on where the show fits in with The Ones Who Live in Dead City. The Ones Who Live's ending, which is the spinoff about Rick and Michonne, happens just before Daryl Dixon season 1. It's practically the same time, maybe a month or two before that. It's roughly the same time. Like, I would say it happens probably a month or two before the Daryl Dixon premiere. Like, it's about there. And for Dead City, well, that takes place about 5.5 years or like 6 years after The Ones Who Live and Daryl Dixon. So it's around that time frame. Like, it's very far into the future, and it does mess with the timeline a little bit. I mean, it doesn't really mess with it. You're just sort of left wondering, like, at this point in Dead City, where's Rick and Michonne? Where's Daryl and Carol, right? Do Maggie and Negan know what happened with them? And that's one of the things with that show is they can never really reference any of those characters. If they do, they have to really cleverly write the dialogue in a way that won't spoil anything else, like for future Rick and Michonne stories, or like a season 3, 4, 5, or whatever, 6 of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon, right? Eventually, all the shows will catch up and will be at the same timeline. I mean, it makes sense. Like, there's all this talk of this Endgame series where everyone's going to reunite, and the next Rick and Michonne series, you know, they've been talking about it here and there. They're all very open to coming back. You know, it seems like by the time that happens, like, the actors who played Judith and RJ, they're going to be much older. So it makes sense that you're going to have to jump forward a couple of years into the future, likely catching up with Dead City's timeline. Daryl Dixon is going to be airing over the next couple of years. So I imagine, you know, season 3, 4, 5, at some point, there's going to be a time jump, right? So Dead City's timeline is the closest to the reunion's timeline, obviously. So in terms of the story, though, what do you need to know about the overall story? Well, in terms of the original series, there's not really a lot that you have to know from that series, or from World Beyond, or from like Fear the Walking Dead. Really, this series focuses mostly so far on Daryl, but we are going to get into a lot of Carol's story here in season 2. Daryl went to go search for Rick, as we saw at the very end of The Walking Dead. He ended up in Maine, where he got in trouble with a group at a mechanic shop. A ship was there collecting walkers for these experiments, and Daryl was taken. And on this trip, he got into some disagreements with a lot of the passengers on the ship and some of the people running the ship. He almost got himself killed before fighting back. One of the experiments, or a super walker, got free, almost kills Daryl, but just as the ship explodes, he jumps off the ship and ends up on the shores of France. Daryl wakes up and wonders where he's at, only to learn that he's in France. He travels and looks for any clues on any way he can get back to America, he comes across two survivors before two members of Pouvoir, a group that runs France and are villains of the series, stop by and cause a bunch of trouble, leading to all this chaos. One of the members of Pouvoir dies, and this is important because this member is the brother of one of the new villains, Caudron. Daryl passes out after this, and he's taken to the Abbey by a new character named Isabel, a nun that is a part of a group called the Union of Hope, and is fighting back against Pouvoir. It's here that Daryl learns of their mission. Their mission is to bring a boy named Laurent to this place called the Nest, a place where he can help make the world a better place and bring humanity out of this apocalypse. Daryl obviously doesn't believe in any of this, and after an attack from Pouvoir on the Abbey, it leaves Daryl, Isabel, and some others on their own, so Daryl decides, yeah, you know what, I'll help you out, and they begin traveling to the Nest. Now, this group Pouvoir that I'm talking about, who are they? Well, their leader goes by the name Madame Genet, and it's revealed that she has scientists working on walker experiments in order to create a super walker, or I guess just super walkers in general. We don't know why, we don't know a lot of the details behind that yet. Season 2 is likely going to get into that, so there's still a lot of mystery there. A lot of what we saw here was just a lot of the tease and the setup and the reveal of the super walker in season 1. But yeah, she's been doing some research for quite some time. There's some connections with Jenner from the original Walking Dead series as well, or at least there seems to be some connections there. We don't exactly know what yet, but that was teased at the very end of the Walking Dead World Beyond's post-credit scene. Now, Isabel, well, she used to have a rough life and she found faith and it helped her through it. She takes care of her nephew Laurent and believes he's the next Messiah, but it's not only her that believes in that. Everyone in France seems to really believe in Laurent, which is actually a big reason why Madame Genet feels threatened by him, because Madame Genet is the leader of Pouvoir, the villain group of the series, but she has a lot of political power over France. And so Laurent, who a lot of people really look up to, if he goes to the Nest and he starts to get a following, you know, that can definitely threaten her power that she has over France, right? And so she becomes concerned with this. But the reason why people believe in Laurent specifically is because he was born from a walker, which, yes, sounds really insane. His mother died and was a walker, and Laurent was born. And so it sounds pretty insane. I mean, we haven't really seen anything like that before on The Walking Dead, but it created this legend, and now everyone has belief in Laurent. Now, there's a lot of story that I'm overlooking because I'm trying to get to, again, the main beats of the story here of the season, and there's a lot of great stuff that happens, and I really do recommend checking out season 1 if you do have the time, because there's like references to Jim Morrison. There's a lot of really great stuff, and eventually on their travels, Daryl, Isabel, and the others end up in this nightclub in which they run into Laurent's actual father, Quinn, who was also Isabel's ex. And Caudron, Pouvoir, and I guess Madame Genet, they all find out that they're there, so a lot of battles happen, this and that. Eventually, everyone gets caught and is brought by Pouvoir to this one place. I'm not sure what the building's called, but it basically sets up this final showdown here. Before this happens, though, there's one thing I do want to mention. There's a really cool scene between Daryl and Laurent. It's a very emotional scene where Daryl is yelling at Laurent, and he's acting a lot like his father, because this is the first time Daryl's really been in a situation where he's had to really like parent someone this much, and he sees the way Laurent's acting and it's frustrating him. And so Daryl, you know, not really being in a situation like this, starts to act like his father, and he catches himself. But it's a really cool scene. And again, like I was saying, there's some really great Daryl character stuff here in this season. I mean, obviously it makes sense. It's called The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon, but they really explore the character so much more, so much better than they did in the original series. And that's why I'm saying it's definitely worth it to watch the season. But once they're caught by Pouvoir, Madame Genet wants to make an example of Daryl in front of everyone and reveals her new super walker to the world. The problem is this super walker isn't fully ready yet. And yes, it does attack Daryl and Quinn, who is Laurent's father. He dies, but it's not really that important overall to the story. Daryl struggles against the super walker, but luckily for him, they released a second super walker, and it turns out what's wrong with the super walkers is that whenever they see each other, they kill each other, and so they both just basically took each other out, and it embarrasses Madame Genet in front of everybody, allowing Daryl to escape with Isabel and the others, and they make their way to the Nest, and they're almost there, but they come across Caudron and Pouvoir, and a really interesting scene happens here where Caudron actually allows Daryl to leave, literally saving his life, and it raises the question of, you know, what side is he on, and he'll eventually get in trouble by Madame Genet, but yeah, we'll see how that plays out in season 2, because in the trailer for season 2, I mean, we see that Madame Genet is not too happy with him, right? Daryl and Isabel and the others finally make it to the Nest, only for Daryl to say goodbye to everybody because he wants to go back to America. That's where his family is, and on his way back, he actually comes across his grandfather's grave. He fought in the war, he died on D-Day, some very emotional Daryl stuff here. He eventually gets to the shore and wants to leave, but sees Laurent behind him, in which Daryl decides to stay in France for the time being. And Season 2 is going to pick up, like I said, pretty much right after this moment, with Daryl now back at the nest with Laurent. Super Walkers are going to be more insane this season, and the season finale is supposed to be like the best 1 hour of anything Walking Dead ever, or something like that, according to Norman Reedus anyway, so yeah, we'll see. And for Carol, obviously, she's going to be a big part here of Season 2. She hasn't had a lot of stories since the ending of The Walking Dead. I mean, really, at the end, you saw her say goodbye to Daryl. I'm assuming she went back to live at the Commonwealth and obviously help raise Judith and RJ. And after not hearing from Daryl after a while, she goes out to look for him. She does contact Daryl during episode 5 of Season 1, and it's during a flashback scene in which Daryl's on the ship going to France, so it's before he even gets there or anything. Actually, I think the ship is just like outside of Maine. And she mentions that somebody came back. We don't know who she was saying came back, but everyone is assuming right now that because The Ones Who Live just ended and it just happens like right before this moment, it's likely that Carol meant that Rick came back, and so she was likely telling Daryl that, you know, Rick came back, and so the radio cut out, and so obviously he doesn't know that, but now she's going to go look for him, so I'm assuming that when they reunite this season, we're likely going to find out exactly what she meant by that. And maybe it's not Rick, maybe it ends up being something else, but I'm assuming that it has to be Rick, because I think that's why Daryl is still going to want to come back to America. I mean, I think overall he's going to want to, but I think that's going to be a big part to it though, right? Like, he has to come back after that. Carol eventually ends up traveling to Maine though, because obviously she lost contact with Daryl and she's really worried about him. And so she finds the same mechanic shop that Daryl was at. And I'm not going to spoil what happens after this, because a lot of this happens in the first episode of Season 2. But I'll say, if you've seen the trailer for Season 2, you'll know that she obviously learns that Daryl's in France, and she ends up taking a plane, because we see that in the trailer, to get to France. And so, yeah, there's a lot of details there on how that's all going to play out, and we'll see that happen in the Season 2 premiere. So, yeah, we have that to look forward to. But then eventually Carol will be in France looking for Daryl, and we'll just have to wait and see when both of those characters are going to reunite, right? But that really is the story overall. Daryl and Carol are going to reunite at some point here in Season 2. Carol is searching for Daryl, and Daryl is in trouble right now at the nest dealing with Pouvoir, because obviously Pouvoir is not done with Daryl yet. Like, Madame Genet got embarrassed pretty badly there in the finale, right, with the Super Walker and what Daryl did. So she's very upset with that. Also, Laurent is at the nest now, so that's going to be another threat to her. So there's all of that happening, but that's generally what you need to know before watching The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2. Again, Dead City's storyline doesn't really play a role in this. The Ones Who Live doesn't necessarily play a role in this, besides the fact that Rick and Michonne are back, and Carol might know that, so Carol might tell Daryl about that. In terms of Daryl's story, I recapped all of Daryl's story here in this video. There might be some details I'm missing here and there, but that's generally what to know. And in terms of Carol's story, I recapped that as well. There hasn't been a lot that's happened with her since the finale of The Walking Dead, but this season is going to focus a lot on her, because Season 2 has the subtitle, The Book of Carol. There's going to be a lot of great Sophia scenes as well. So yeah, I'm so excited for The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2, but definitely post your thoughts down below. I hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.